Our presentation today is titled Structure and Organization of Government. And here we're trying to basically understand what is the arrangement, what is the procedure of governance, right? How how is governance within the state structured or arranged, and how is the process of governance also carried out, basically. That's what we're trying to understand in this presentation. All right, now this is a question that we'll try to answer before the end of this presentation. All right, is government an art or a science? This is one question that has been on the front burner for many students of government political science over the years, and we'll try to answer this question as we progress. Now, governance can be described as both an academic field, of study, um, because of the rigor of data collection, data analysis, um, and all of those other issues that are involved in the systematic study of government as an academic field. It is also an institution of government, an institution of the state that is used for running the affairs of the state. And to that extent, it is more of an art kind of this thing. So, as an academic field, I mentioned already that it is a systematic study of how groups and individuals interact, with regards to power, authority, the state's resources, and allocation of such resources. So, um, so government basically is an academic field, and of course, it's also an institution. So it can be said that government, is both an art and a science. In response to the question that was asked um, in the previous slide. Now the question is how is government structured? Because every government has a structure, every government has an organization. So how is government structured? How is government organized? That's the question we're trying to answer in this presentation. Now, there are four major types of structure that every state, every government must take, or four major types from which every government must pick one of such structures. So basically, every government, every state is structured in one of these four ways. That's the point we're making. Every government is structured in one of these four ways, or one of these four systems. All right, the unitary system, the federal system, the confederal, and of course the military system. So every state in the international society or in the global society assumes one of these four structures of government. Now we'll look at these structures one after the other, beginning with the unitary system. The unitary system is a structure where government is organized in a single central form, where there's one central control of government. So it means that the executive powers in such a state, legislative powers, are concentrated in a single central government. So there's one unit of administration, basically, and you don't have even when you have other units present, those other units are assigned roles and responsibilities as the need arises. So one unit of government is supreme, to other units if they exist. All right, that is the unitary system of government, and of course, this system is believed to foster unity because there's just one unit of government, that fosters, that administers the entire system, the entire structure of government, and so it fosters unity, it fosters cooperation. Offices are not duplicated because you don't have the same offices at the center, maybe at the state level, at the local level, and all of that. And there are so many other advantages or merits of this structure or system of government. There are also disadvantages or demerits, which of course you might have to you can look up for some of those disadvantages on your own. All right. The second structure or system is the federal system, which of course is the system that we practice in Nigeria. The Nigerian state is structured in a federal system, and just like we said about the unitary system, the federal is the opposite. In the federal system, power is decentralized. So it means power is divided among the central government as well as the other units of government. All right, so you don't have power sitting or residing only in one unit of government at the center, but power is divided, is distributed. All right, the central government has its functions. The other units of government, both at the state and the local level, also have their functions that they perform. And this decentralization or division is done by the constitution. So it means that you don't have the federal government or the central government, assigning responsibilities to other units of government, but rather the constitution assigns to every unit of government what their functions and their responsibilities are. All right, that is the federal system of government. And of course, like the unitary system, this one also has both advantages and disadvantages. All right, here one of the or some of the disadvantages, some of the advantages rather, are the fact that there's no fear of domination. That one group, one section of the state would overshadow or dominate or you know basically overshadow the rest of the state. So that is one major advantage of this. And of course, more people are included in governance, because since government power is distributed or divided, you know, down the line to the grassroots, it means that more people get involved in the process of governance. So these are some of the advantages of the federal system, all right, as opposed to the unitary system. And of course, the federal system also has disadvantages. In fact, some might even argue that the advantages of the federal are disadvantages of the unitary, and the advantages of the unitary structure are the disadvantages of the federal. So they are more or less, two sides of the same coin. All right. The confederal system now, which is also known as the confederation, is a structure where there's a league of sovereign states, sovereign independent states coming together, to agree. Perhaps they're coming together on the basis of certain mutual goals that mutual goals that they want to accomplish or they want to achieve. So these sovereign states come together and then they agree on certain courses of action. They agree to give up some part of their sovereignty to the confederation. There's some kind of government structure that regulates the behavior of the states which are members of this confederation. So it is the confederation. The confederal arrangement is one where various states come together, and they don't give up all of their sovereignty to the confederal government. All right, because states can decide to pull out of the confederation at any time, since they remain sovereign states. All right, but of course the confederation has autonomy. The confederation has the features of a state. Basically, it has its government, it has sovereignty, because the states that make up the confederation give up some part of their sovereignty to the confederation. So the confederation has sovereignty to determine what goes on within the states. And of course, the states also, are obliged to concur, to obey, to oblige the confederation, or to adhere to the laws, the rules, and regulations that are made by the confederal government. So this is a very unique structure of government which doesn't presently exist. The last confederation that is known in political science was this Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, which break away, or which broke up in 1991, into over 15 different sovereign states. So that is the last known confederation, perhaps, that we could make as an example, you know, um, that existed. So that is the confederal system of government. It is one where independent sovereign states come together and agree on certain based on certain mutual agreements or certain mutual goals. They come together, and they agree to form a government. That government regulates the activities, especially in pursuant to those mutual goals that bind them together. All right, and then of course, the confederal government has sovereignty, which these states give up, some part of the sovereignty for the confederal system to function. And finally, we have the military system, which is mostly believed to be an aberration, to the normal circumstances. Because in the military system, rather than have civilians in government, you have military officers in government. It's a system where the military takes over the apparatus, the institution of governance, and then the military runs the state as the government. That is a military structure, and we have had several of such instances, in the Nigerian state where the military, was in power. So these are the four systems or structures of government, or government or the state that we have. And it is believed that every state, every government is structured in one of these four ways. All right, every state is structured in one of these four ways. But some of the most popular, structure of government are either the unitary structure or the federal structure. The confederal is not in existence. At least there's no known example currently of a confederal state. And of course, the military system. Presently, of course, Mali still has a military system in place. Because of the coup that happened there sometime last month or 2 months ago. So Mali still has a military system in place, but hopefully that returns to either a unitary rather, or a federal system. Okay, so that's basically it about the structure of government. Government is structured in one of these four ways. Now, how is government organized? What is the procedure of governance? How is governance carried out? Right? We've talked about the structure. How is governance carried out now? Two forms or styles, of governance, of organizing, exercising power within the structures that we have just mentioned, are the parliamentary or the cabinet and the presidential forms or styles of government. All right. So we're saying that for any structure of government that a state, adopts, that structure is organized in one of these two forms or styles. Okay. So for instance, the Nigerian state adopts the federal structure and organizes governance using the presidential form or style of government. All right. So there are two major types of, or two major forms rather, or styles of government, within which governance is organized. So two major organizations of government, which are the presidential and the parliamentary. All right. Now, the parliamentary form or parliamentary style of governance is one where executive powers lie in the parliament or in the lawmaking, in the legislature, basically. Lawmaking powers, executive powers lie in the legislature. All right. Legislature is the arm of government that has the lawmaking powers, but executive powers equally lie in that arm of government. That is what we mean by the parliamentary form of government. All right. So some of the features of this form is that the parliament is sovereign, and of course the parliament supersedes all other units of government. The parliament also exercises the power of the head, or power in the parliament is exercised by the head of the parliament, who is the prime minister. So the prime minister basically is described as the head of government because he is the one in charge, or he or she rather, is the one in charge of the day-to-day running of the state. So the prime minister is regarded as the head of government because power resides in the prime minister, who is also the head of the parliament. All right. And of course, in this system, there is really no separation of power between the executive and the legislature. And of course, the reason why is because we say that executive power lie in the parliament, which of course is the legislature. So you can't, there's no separation of power. Separation of power does not exist, between the executive powers and legislative powers. More or less lie in the same place, which of course is the parliament. All right, members of the parliament are nominated by the prime minister. In some cases the prime minister is elected, in some cases the prime minister is appointed. But of course, the UK, India are some examples of this parliamentary form of government. So the point we're making is that in the parliamentary form of government, executive powers lie in the hands of the parliament, or lie in the parliament, basically in the hands of the prime minister. All right, and so the business of governance is carried out, led by the parliament. All right, since executive and legislative powers lie in the parliament, the business of governance is carried out by the parliament. All right, so in Britain, as an example, which of course in UK, United Kingdom, as an example, which is one of the examples given for the parliamentary form, United Kingdom is structured in a federal system. All right, has a federal structure, but of course it's run by the parliamentary form of government because power resides in the parliament, and of course the parliament supersedes all the other districts, all the other councils, and so on, what you have in the UK. All right, and the same goes for India as well. The second form is the presidential form, which of course is slightly opposite or different from the parliamentary form. Here, power is separated. There's the executive arm of government that has its own functions, its own powers, and of course, there's the legislature, which of course is in charge of making laws. So, in the presidential form, you have a president. You have a president, but of course, the president does not possess supreme authority, right? The president does not possess supreme authority because even though the president has executive powers, there's also the legislature, which is there to check the powers of the executive, and the executive as well is there to check the powers of the legislature. But that you don't have in the parliamentary form because both executive and legislative powers lie in the parliament. We're talking about the parliamentary form, but rather in the presidential form, power is separated, between the executive and the legislature, and each of them checks the excesses of the powers of one another. All right. So I've mentioned already that power is separated, and of course, is separated by the Constitution. Okay. The president, of course, is the chief executive of the state. He has veto power. It's allowed by law to use, especially in cases of emergency, in cases of conflict, wars, the executive president can use veto power. All right. But unlike the prime minister in the parliamentary system, who is sometimes appointed, the president in the presidential form, rather, is always elected. All right, is elected. And of course, he's elected by the electorate, by the people. But in most cases, or in some cases, the prime minister is appointed. In some cases, the prime minister is elected, depending on what the nature or what obtains in a particular state. All right. And of course, in the presidential form, power is shared among the three, the three organs of government. You have power. You have power in the executive. You have executive powers. You have legislative powers, and then you have judicial powers. But in the parliamentary form, what you have basically, is executive powers, which lie essentially in the in the parliament, as well as legislative powers, and then you have judicial powers. So in the parliamentary form, you have basically two forms of government, or two arms of government, organs of government. Executive, legislative in one arm, and then judiciary in the other arm. All right. I hope this is understandable. So the presidential form has all three organs of government separated. The executive, legislative, and judiciary separate from one another. All right. While the parliamentary form has executive and legislative powers merged into one, and then judicial powers separate from the two. Okay. We'll go ahead now to talk about these organs of government. All right, or the arms of government, as it were, the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. All right. Every modern system, every modern state has these three arms of government. In some, two of them are fused into one. In some, all three are separate. All right. But all these three organs of government are present in every modern state. And why is that so? Because it is believed that these three organs of government exist to perform the three major functions of government. So if one of them is lacking, it means that that function of government is lacking. All right. And these three functions of government, as it is shown on the slide, are rule making, rule implementation, and rule interpretation. These are the three functions that every government, is expected to perform. And these functions rather, can only be performed by these three organs of government. So if one of these organs is lacking, it means that one of these functions of government is lacking. And as such, government is not efficient. All right. The legislature or the legislative arm performs the rule-making function. The executive arm performs the rule implementation or the rule application function, while the judicial arm performs the rule interpretation or the rule adjudication function. So these are the three major functions of government that are performed by the three major arms of government. So whether it is in the parliamentary form of government where executive, legislative powers are fused, or in the presidential form of government where all three functions are separated, all these three functions are always present in every state. That's something that we must underscore and understand. All right. Now, the legislature, like we said, is the arm of government that is responsible for making laws in the states. And there are basically two types of legislature, right? You have the unicameral legislature, which is made up of one chamber, and of course there are examples of states where you have such unicameral legislature, and then you have the bicameral as well, where you have two chambers. You have the upper chamber and you have the lower chamber. The US, Canada, Nigeria are some examples of this bicameral type of legislature. In Nigeria, for instance, we have the Senate as the upper chamber, and we have the House of Representatives as the lower chamber. In the US, there's the Senate, of course, as the upper chamber, and there's also the House of Representatives, or the Congress, as it's called, as the lower chamber. All right. So those are examples of the bicameral types of legislature, or type of legislature rather. So these are the two types of legislature that we have: unicameral, where there's one chamber, and then bicameral, where there are two chambers. Legislative functions, include involvement in the confirmation of public officers, which is of course an aspect of executive function. So, there are places where executive legislative functions overlap. Remember, we said that each of these two arms of government check the powers of one another. All right. So executive functions check the powers of legislative functions. Legislative functions check the powers of executive functions. So there are places where they overlap, and this is one of such places. Public officers, ministers, for instance, heads of services are appointed by the executive, but they are confirmed by the legislature. The legislature confirms, screens these candidates and confirms them. All right. The legislature also approves the budget. The budget is compiled by the executive, but the legislature approves, screens the budget and approves what the executive has compiled. The legislature can impeach public officers as well, depending on their competence, integrity, and what have you. The legislature also identifies and discusses public interests, and so many other functions that are listed there. All right. The executive function, or the executive arm of government, which is the second organ or arm of government, we said is responsible for applying, implementing the laws, policies of the state. All right. And of course, some of the functions of the executive are issuing orders, initiating bills that the legislature should look at, and deliberate, and if the need be, approve, all right, to become laws. The executive also conducts foreign affairs, foreign relations among other or with other sovereign states. The executive controls the military. Ideally, they appoint and remove public officers. Remember, I said that the executive appoints, but the legislature confirms such public officers. The executive also pardons offenses. Remember that the judiciary is in charge of condemning or vindicating criminals, right? But in some cases, the executive has the power to also pardon and convict criminals. And not necessarily convict, but to pardon criminals, to just pardon offenses. But after trials have been done and conviction have been passed. So the point is that the executive arm of government has some judicial powers, because if they're able to pardon criminals, it means that they're able to overturn judgments that have been done, right? That have been passed by judiciary. So that is some form of judicial powers, which also go into the veto power that we talked about, that the executive arm of government exercises in terms of emergency as well, or in certain cases when the need arises. All right. So in essence, we're saying that there has to be for both rule making and rule application functions to survive or to be efficient in every state. There has to be a cordial relationship between the executive arm of government and the legislative arm of government. The reason is because the functions of these two arms or organs of government overlap, right? And so if there's no relationship, if there's no cordial relationship between these two arms of government, then those overlapping functions will not be carried out effectively. For instance, if the executive and the legislature are not in good terms, when the executive compiles a budget and submits it to the legislature for scrutiny and approval, the legislature would make the process longer, and sometimes frustrate the executive in delaying the process and maybe not approving some substantial part of the budget as well. So there has to be that relationship between these two organs of government for the process of governance to be effective and efficient. All right. The judiciary is the third organ of government, which we said is responsible for interpreting or applying the rules that have been made by the legislature rather. So is in charge of interpreting these laws, and of course, where the need arises, apply the laws as well. Apply the laws to certain cases as well. So the judiciary is supposed to be independent of these other two. So while the executive and legislature should have a cordial relationship, the judiciary should be independent. It should not have relationship with any of these other two organs. It should be the most independent organ of government possible. And that's because of the sensitivity and the very delicate nature of the function of the judiciary. All right, judges are supposed to be honest, impartial, independent, and possess sound legal knowledge, because of course a judge should be able to know the laws, well enough to apply them or to interpret them where the need arises. Okay, so the functions of the judiciary include dispute settlement, between individuals or between the state and individuals. All right, it includes prevention of the violation of laws by issuing restraining orders. Restraining orders are orders that prevent violence from occurring. All right. Also, they provide judicial reviews, that become laws and that are binding on everyone, and they help to protect the rights of individuals. They help to protect people's rights, people's properties from being, from being hijacked by other people who perhaps might be more influential or more powerful. I help to prevent people from being harassed, indiscriminately by the public or by any other individual. So basically, these are from some functions of the judiciary, and like we said, the judiciary is expected to be independent. And how do you ensure that the judiciary is independent? There are a few ways that the independence of the judiciary is pursued or is ensured, and one of them is the appointment of judges. So in appointing judges, it's expected that the process should be very neutral, so that whoever is appointed a judge, does not become loyal to the executive or to the legislature. And so the process of appointing judges is such that a National Judicial Council, lists recommended candidates that can be appointed or that qualify to be appointed as judges. So the National Judicial Council is the one that shortlists candidates for the position of judge. All right, and then they submit that list to the executive, who now picks one of the candidates from the list that has been provided and sends that list to the legislature for approval, or sends that candidate rather for approval. All right, so that way, the role of the executive in appointing of the judges is reduced, so much so that the National Judicial Council has the prerogative to shortlist whoever it is that is qualified to be a candidate for whatever post. All right. A second way of ensuring independence is by an attractive salary. All right. So once judges are paid attractive salaries, they are not able to easily be turned over or bought over by certain individuals who might want to buy over the decision of the judge in their favor, with certain gifts, monetary gifts, or whatever other kinds of gifts. All right. And of course, the office of the tenure of office, of course, of the judges as well is secure. So when a judge comes to office, they have a tenure of office. They know this is when they are leaving. So they cannot just be appointed and fired at will. Their jobs are secured. So these are some of the ways by which the independence of judges is promoted, so that judges have independence, they have the honesty, they have the integrity with which to deliver justice, to interpret the law as well as possible and apply it to cases, when the need arises as well, so that justice, is served eventually. All right. In conclusion, we have said that we have understood already that government is both an art and a science, in the sense that government is an institution of the state used to carry out the day-to-day activities of the state, and it is also a field of study, where individuals go and systematically want to understand the process of decision making of resource allocation, and so on and so forth. So government is both an art and a science. It is an important instrument for the state, and of course must be properly structured and organized. We've talked about the structures, the unitary, federal, confederal, and the military. So that the military is an abnormal structure. We've talked about the organization, presidential, parliamentary forms or styles of carrying out the business of governance. And we have also said that every state, must have these three organs of government, because the three organs of government help in the performance of the three major functions of government, which we said are rule making, rule application, and rule interpretation. Or rule making, rather, rule implementation and rule interpretation. So the executive implements the law, the legislative makes the law, while the judiciary interprets the law. These are three functions that must be performed by every state, and so the three organs of states of government must be present in every state to perform these three functions of government. But we've also said finally that the judiciary must be independent, and we've talked about some of the steps that are made or are taken to ensure the independence of the judiciary. All right. So that's where we're going to end the presentation for today. If you have questions, arising from any part of this presentation, from the structures or governance of or organization or the the types organs of government, let's have those questions. Let's talk about them, and let's continue the conversation. All right. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening.